There are well over 30 locations around the country where people will be rallying this coming Sunday against Israel's genocide and Australia's complicity in it. This comes after the historic Sydney Harbour Bridge March on August 3, where up to, or maybe even more than 300,000 people marched in the rain. Can you talk about why there is such a response to this call for action at the moment and what people can do to build it?
Yes, look, I think we've obviously gone past something of a tipping point, and there's been a new massification, if you like, of the movement. And I think there are three things which explain that concurrently. One is that the hard work of the Palestine solidarity movement over the last 2 years, nearly, of chipping away at mass consciousness, of raising the flag, explaining the issues again and again and again through more, in lots of different places, through lots of means, whether they're the weekly or the fortnightly or the monthly rallies or vigils or whatever they are in the given centre, all the cultural, manifestations, the film showings, the public meetings, the mass leafleting drives, all that sort of stuff, all those different forms of activity, have started to coalesce together in terms of tipping or pushing mass consciousness and along on this question. I think the second thing, obviously, is that in the weeks leading up to the Sydney Harbour Bridge March, the scale of the horror started spilling out uncensored into the mainstream media. So the fact that Palestinians were being shot and murdered deliberately in their scores or even hundreds at these so-called aid distribution points started coming into the media. And then that in turn was accompanied by images of starving children. And then thirdly, the very fact of the New South Wales government seeking to lean on the police to prohibit the march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, I think that compelled people to attend that rally. There's no question about that. There's lots of people can't go to every single Palestine action every day of the week, but they all had a good reason to go to this one. There was an attempt to squash free speech. I think, and so all those three things all came together. I think perhaps another thing which I didn't mention is also the outrageous overreach of the Siegel report, the misnamed report into anti-Semitism as well. And bear in mind that there'd been that revelation of the fact that Siegel's husband contributes, and she contributes to this Advance Australia right-wing lobby group, and it's quite embarrassing for Albanese. I mean, he appointed her with a very conscious purpose of muting criticism of Israel, but the fact that she's part of this racist far-right lobby group that actively campaigns for the coalition and not Labor was all a bit awkward and embarrassing, and started fraying support for the Albanese position within Labor's ranks. All those things have come together to push us past this tipping point, I think.
In terms of August 24, there's so many locations where there haven't been rallies organised frequently. Can you comment on that?
It's utterly extraordinary, and it's a beautiful thing to see just the flowering of actions. I mean, I can only just speaking from my experience here in Western Australia, just off the top of my head, I know there's locations such as Geraldton, Karratha, Bunbury, Manjimup, Albany, Margaret River. Just to name a few, where there's going to be actions this Sunday. So it's like I say, we've crossed a tipping point in terms of this movement. Assuming, look, it's been a mass movement already, but actually there's sufficient momentum to really kind of express that, and I think I think probably the scale of the march across Sydney Harbour Bridge has given a lot of people confidence where they didn't have confidence before, or confidence or belief that we can make a difference. Because momentum and morale are so important with these things, and at the moment the momentum and the morale is with our campaign, which is a very important, precious thing. And all of us who are already active in the movement need to think about how we keep that momentum, push that momentum along.
What comments can you make about how you think we can reach out to even broader sections of the community to take a practical stand in this campaign, and what are the limits to expressing moral outrage alone?
Yeah, I think there's two things. First, for the people who In fact, I'd say there's three things. First, there's the people who are horrified by what they see happening, but don't really have very little historical understanding. So, oh, well, there's good and bad on both sides, and, they're all to blame and that sort of stuff, So with such people, we need to begin the process of educating them about the systematic violent dispossession of Palestinians, and the Palestinians are the underdogs, they're the oppressed. And that you actually do need to take a side in such a situation. That's the first thing. And for the people who already understand that, then the next thing we need to educate people around is the fact that Australia is not just a neutral bystander in this process. That's been one of the fallback positions of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong in particular, amongst people who are starting to realise the horror of what's going on, is to say, oh, but Australia has plays no role. We're on the other side of the world, all this kind of thing. So for such people, we need to explain, no, Australia is actually deeply complicit in Israel's actions, not just through its political defence of so much of what Israel has done up to this point. That's beginning to shift a little bit, but of course, the trade and in particular military ties, something that the Albanese government has continuously and deliberately obfuscated on. The two-way military ties, not just our export of weapons to Israel, which are important, but are still relatively small, but also what we buy from Israel via the Elbit Systems deal. And I should add, it's not just that through the Elbit Systems deal that Australia is pumping $900 million into the Israeli industrial military complex, but Australia's future fund is also invested in Elbit Systems. And then thirdly, of course, is the intelligence sharing. I think it'd be naive not to think that the United States doesn't direct intelligence that is harvested via Pine Gap to Israel. So for people who, are starting to get an inkling of the horror, then the next thing we need to explain to them is Australia, that there are concrete things Australia could do to tip the balance in favour of the Palestinians and in favour of peace and justice, and to end the genocide. And Australia needs to start being part of the solution, not part of the problem. And then the third thing is to convince them that we can do it, that change is possible, and that we can make a difference, and being active makes a difference, and not just throw up our hands and get depressed about it. And that brings me back to the point we were talking about before about momentum and morale, which is really important.
Can you make any comments about how this movement can win broader institutional support? I guess I'm especially thinking from the trade unions, but also faith communities.
Well, I think it needs to keep doing what it's been doing, basically. I mean, it is starting to win broader-based support. We saw a few months ago the Uniting Church, which had been fairly silent, like most of the churches, making quite a detailed public statement and something of a mea culpa as well, where the Uniting Church admitted that it had been silent, and that and had lacked courage, and that now's the time to speak out. I think that's right. I think we should actually welcome that. The best time to oppose genocide is yesterday, but the second best time is today. So that's fantastic. We shouldn't be churlish about that. Or say, oh well, we're not going to accept your support because where were you a year ago? No, it's good. People change. That momentum is really important. So that is happening, and I think you'd have to say that some of those more institutionalised civil society organisations, like the churches and the unions, have dragged their feet and have had to be pulled along by the weight of public opinion. And in many cases, their leaderships are catching up with public opinion for fear that they not be seen relevant, basically. It's pity it's taken that the unions in particular, with some honourable exceptions, haven't led. But I think that's where the movement needs to keep on doing what it's been doing to reach out to those institutions. Of course, it also needs to consciously seek to reach out to them. And I know, I think in most centres, the organising committees doing the 24th of August National Day of Action have written to unions and church organisations and other NGOs asking them to sponsor, to provide a contingent, to bring their banner, and to really expand the weight and momentum of the movement.
I wanted to ask you to make some comments specifically about the importance of making concrete demands on the Australian government, such as sanctioning Israel and ending the two-way arms trade.
Yeah, this is absolutely vital. There's no point. Well, I wouldn't say there's no point, but it's a desperate missed opportunity for our mobilisations, whatever they are, whether they're a film showing or a mass demonstration in the city, not to put pressure on the Australian government to stop its military support for Israel and to impose sanctions, and not just targeted sanctions, but broad-based sanctions. That's still a struggle we have, and it's, I make that point because a number of unions have endorsed the 24th of August and encouraging their members to attend. But it's also notable that in the publicity that they have been putting out, oftentimes they're not running with the official demands of the campaign, which in many cities include sanctions now, or cut military ties and things to that effect. I know some unions here in Western Australia have written to their members saying attend, but they've used just. They've only raised the demand or the proposal of ceasefire now. Let the aid in. Well, of course we want a ceasefire and we want to let the aid in. But a very clear demand of our rally in Perth this Sunday is going to be sanctions now. The Australian government needs to impose sanctions, and the mobilisations need to put pressure on the Australian government to do something. And do something a lot more meaningful than what it's been doing. If the Australian government was fair dinkum about peace and justice in Palestine, then it would start with military sanctions and then proceed to broader-based sanctions. It's trying to do everything but, and that's. We should resist. Of course, the way we formulate our demands needs to be broad-based. It needs to be appealing. It needs to be understandable by the broadest sweep of the population it possibly can. But that does not mean watering down the demands or muting the demands or trying to make them elbow compatible. No, sorry. The demands still need to flush out the reality of the fact that the Albanese government at the moment, although it's shifted a little bit, especially in rhetoric, and it's done a few little bits and pieces, it's still fundamentally part of the problem, not part of the solution. And the demands of our movement need to be centred squarely on that. And I think sanctions now is the place to start.